Hello everyone.
Good day, everybody.
Last week when we talked about simple living, we said it touches on so many aspects of our lives, and we established a broad base and touched on it last week and said in all probability we'll have future talks around aspects of simple living as well. So this week we want to touch on one of those aspects. We'll come around to it within a few moments. But just before we talk about that, something that I thought about after last week's talk, which I think is very important, is there's a difference between a simplicity coming out of poverty or scarcity, where you don't have enough food, or in simple terms, you don't have a lot of possessions, which in some ways simplify our lives, but it's a different...
And it's an involuntary poverty.
It's an involuntary poverty.
Yeah, it's like your life just led you to it. Circumstances,
Yes. What we touch upon as part of contemplative spirituality is voluntary simplicity, where we are people with a lot of means in general, if we compare ourselves with the general population, but we make certain conscious choices
to simplify our lives.
To simplify our lives, which is a voluntary, conscious simplicity. And there's a big distinction there. We are talking about the latter.
Yes.
A conscious, voluntary simplicity. And out of that, we said last week, it has to do with our possessions, what we possess and what that means, the implications of that, how it plays into our identity, and maybe we can come back to that also in future. And we talked about time. But today we want to touch on the issue of food. And in a way, when you hear that initially, you say, but how does food play into simplicity? Isn't it stretching it too much?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a tension there as well, because people generally feel so stressed and their lives are generally so difficult that they feel, please just don't touch my food. Let's not go there. You know, at least let me eat what I'm eating. Because to complicate things there, because that's what we also have to say, is that, and we said it previously as well, that to live simply does not mean that it's an easy way to live. In many ways, it may be more complicated because it's conscious choices to simplify, which is difficult in our culture. Our culture is not one of living with simplicity, so it makes it difficult to adapt to that way of living. So in terms of food, I think it boils down to choosing what you eat consciously, because of the principles that you want to live by. If you live contemplatively, if you live a life where you care for the environment, then your food plays an integral part of that principle. So for me, it boils down to a couple of things, but one of the things would be, where does my food come from? And to look at that maybe a little bit. I'm thinking of, for us, we really love avocados. So in South Africa, generally we have a very long season where we can get South African avos for a good price. But then there is a season in the year where avos are not available in South Africa, and it has to be imported, usually from Spain. And then the price per avo goes up, I would say, 400%. And to then for us, it's easy that we just don't have the money to afford the Spanish avos. But in terms of the principle of living simply, it also for us is not something that we will then buy. So it will be, let's eat seasonal. Let's eat as far as we can food that were produced as close to us as possible. Because it makes the footprint so much
the carbon
lighter,
footprint.
the carbon footprint so much lighter, which plays into our principle of caring for the environment.
And where simplicity has a very, very strong link to mindfulness.
Yeah, for sure.
To live consciously, not sleepwalking and just taking something out of the shelf without looking, without thinking of where it comes from. It's really a conscious choice that you make. Because it implies also that we look at the packaging. If it comes from far, it has to be packaged in a certain way so that it isn't bruised, so that it can have a long shelf life. Are there preservatives added? So that whole process, and then you discover how, merely standing back and looking at it, you discover how complicated it becomes. Because things have to be added. It has to be packaged in a certain way. And we come back to that maxim that we touched on last week, to move away from the trivial many to the essential few.
Just repeat that.
To move away from the trivial many to the essential few. And
Bring
that,
it down to food.
yes, where we buy stuff that's not seasonal, where we buy stuff where the packaging is such an important part of it that it has an influence on the ecology and further on in the cycles of nature. So there are all these many aspects that come into play. The essential few is, I have something in my garden and I go and I pick it or I harvest it and I prepare it.
But does that mean that everybody has to grow their own food?
I don't think it's reasonable or practical in a lot of ways. People can live in a small apartment, in a high-rise building, and it's just not possible. I don't think one should give up trying. You can do a lot in pots on your balcony in terms of herbs and other stuff. Even the enjoyment you get out of that.
Of picking fresh herbs instead of buying dried ones. Or drying your own herbs. You have lots of fresh herbs.
So I don't think that everybody should have a vegetable garden. It's not always possible. But in whatever, and when we talk about simple living, it touches on that issue. It's not a simple matter. It sounds so flimsy when you use the word, but it is a bulk of a concept.
Yeah, it's an encompassing. It encompasses your life. Nothing is just. Everything has to be looked at with that fresh look of: is this essential? Is this necessary? Is this good for me?
Is this good
Is
for
it
the
good
world?
for the world?
Is it good for other people?
Yeah.
Is what I'm using indiscriminately? How was this produced? What type of labor was involved in producing this?
And then, of course, it's very difficult if you have a full-time job and a couple of kids at home, and you rush home from work and you need to prepare food in an hour or two. So it's not, again, simple. And it's even more difficult when you are trying to live with the simplicity, but you are making a living in our culture.
Yes.
So there's a lot of, it sort of clashes up against each other.
Yes.
So there's a lot of balancing to do there. But it's like you say, just being more conscious.
Yes.
Maybe finding out in your, where you live in a city or a town, where there's a fresh market, fresh produce market, or we're lucky in a place where we live that people have their own chickens and you can buy free-range eggs from them. So to support local produce.
Yes.
So these things, but you will have to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
I think that the advantage in that is that it's such a, it gives you such a feeling of real contribution to the earth, of really being good to yourself and everything and everybody around you. I think also in terms then from where your food comes from, but then what's in your food.
Yes.
Like we were saying, is this food good for me?
Yeah.
Because if it's not good for me, if it's loaded with preservatives and sugar and all of that, then I'm compromising my health again.
Yes.
Which plays into that cost that I will need more medical help or more supplements, because I'm not getting the nutrition that I need from my food.
Yes, yes. Because simple living has to do with mindfulness, but it also has to do with living an integrated life, where all the parts of my life are in conversation. So in other words, it's not as if my diet has nothing to do with my health, or my work doesn't have an impact in the preparation of my food. Everything gets collected in this one, and there's a link between these different aspects. We've spoken about our contact with the environment that we live in, nature, in all its facets, and we talked of, or we touched on the issue of univocity, the one voice of everything, and this spirituality that we are practicing, it is playing into the one voice.
Speaking with that voice.
And speaking with the one voice. Where I'm in a conversation with nature and the ecosystem. I'm in conversation with my body. I'm in conversation with labor practices. I'm in conversation with everything. We don't have the luxury to focus only on soul matters, whatever that may mean, which doesn't have an impact on my body. So it's about integration. It's about integrated living. Simple living is mindful, integrated living. And then when we're busy with our food, we have to be in contact with food, knowing that it also has an impact on my health. Because currently, to a large extent, we have a health system that doesn't pay any attention to nutrition and food. It's much to a large extent, it's chemically based.
Yeah, and it's all about treating symptoms
Yes.
and not. It's changed a lot in
Yes,
terms
yes.
of nature, more nature-based health. But in general, orthodox medicine, I think, does not believe that what you eat plays a part in your health.
Yes. So in other words, a medical system that doesn't pay enough attention to what we eat, and a food industry that doesn't heed the health implications of it. So there's no conversation there.
And then combine that with conditioning that when you are spoiling yourself, it must be something sweet, or there must be alcohol.
It must be
in
something decadent.
It must be something decadent, because I'm spoiling myself. And it just does not make any logical sense that you are spoiling yourself with something that's bad for you. But that's the conditioning that we are living with. And it's a difficult one to break.
Yeah.
To really think that an avo on a piece of sourdough bread is the biggest treat and luxury on this earth.
Or a carrot stick with a celery ribbon.
From the sublime to the ridiculous.
But I mean, that's the implication.
Yeah.
So by living simply, by trying in whatever way we can to be in contact with the way food is produced, in the sense of maybe having your own herb pots, having a small vegetable garden. And it's amazing how small a vegetable garden you need to produce enough food for a household. To do that, and just to live more mindfully, because through food, and that we see so often on the retreats, food plays such a huge part in terms of community and a sense of nourishment and being taken care of. And if you do, and food and the preparation of food done mindfully is different than other food.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we see that with the food. Sebastian works with a couple of principles that's stuck up on the fridge, and that is making things from scratch means that you do it with patience, you practice, and there must be presence. And all of those things is just wonderful in terms of what is then produced.
Yeah.
The energy of that food, and we see that in when people have a plate of that food in front of them. And then also in the enjoyment of cooking like that. Being aware of your senses, of picking the herbs and using it from scratch. It's just, there's just something of a deep feeling of being held. And it's really precious to witness.
One has to ask yourself, how did it happen that it is so difficult to live a life that's good for you? How did we complicate our lives to such an extent that it is an uphill battle to live a good life, a healthy life, a nourishing life? Why do you have to fight to get that? Why does it become
unnatural?
Yes.
To live like that. Why would you be the exception if you live like that?
Yeah. And those are the questions that we ask once we start living simply.
And I think it's not a question of the one day you're not living simply and the next day you're living simply.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with just becoming mindful
Yeah.
of what is not simple in your life. What is not what is the trivial
Many.
muchness in your life,
Yeah.
and how can you start to make it less? How can you get to the essential
Few.
few?
Yeah. So to a large extent, it feels as if when we have these talks, we take a stick and start stirring a beehive, and then we leave it at that. But the fact of the matter is, it's not a blanket approach. So each one of us, with these basic principles that we touch upon, have to look at our own personal life. And you have to apply it. And
Or to make the choice whether that is
Yes.
something that you want to do.
yes, yes. But always lovely to have these chats. And thank you very much for the feedback. We always enjoy to receive that as well and be nourished by that, just as we are nourished by the food. So thank you very much. We'll see you next week then.
Keep well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.